the rehearsal pianist where they just check what key they want to do it in, and they record it, just piano vocals, a rough routine how they want the song to be done. I get that recording then on Friday morning, and then I have just that Friday to write it. And then I would get maybe 2 or 3 songs to write on that Friday. And then I have Saturday morning, I have to deliver it. Saturday morning, then it gets to the copyist. The copyist copies it. Sunday, they record it for the download version, for the studio version, so you can buy it on iTunes. Monday, they rehearse the show. Tuesday, they do the show. Wednesday is the results show. Thursday, start over again.
Wow.
And so I would only work on Fridays for American Idol. The rest of the week, I would do something else.
Wow.
Work on other projects. And I would do that for 7 years. And our Idol season was only from March till May.
But that was a good gig.
It was a good gig, yeah.
Yeah, but that was probably fun too, right?
Well,
besides the pressure.
Yeah, and I mean, musically, it's not that creative. Once in a while, I could take a song and take it somewhere else and do something interesting with it. But usually I was giving a pretty straight direction how they wanted to sound like the original. So there was one year that we had this kid, Adam Lambert, on, and I did a version of Mad World for him. That got a little bit notoriety. That was fun. But for the most part, I don't even remember what songs I arranged for that show.
Well, you were doing it so quickly, too.
Yeah.
So you had to do 3 songs in one day.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, isn't it?
And then when Ricky Minor was the music director of the show at that time, and then he got asked, he was hired away from American Idol to do the Tonight Show, when that was the whole ordeal when Jay Leno came back to do the Tonight Show again after, I think, Conan did it for like a few months or so.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of a fiasco.
It was a fiasco. So Jay Leno came back to do the Tonight Show, and they hired Ricky Minor as the music director, as the band leader. And with Ricky Minor, he brought me along. He also said, "You're coming with me away from American Idol." So I did the Tonight Show then with Ricky for 4 years, including
doing the arrangements.
Yeah, doing the arrangements. Yeah, but also during all that time, American Idol and also the Tonight Show, I never get to see the set. I never go there. I just sit in my room, write the arrangements, and send them off. As a matter of fact, American Idol, having never been on the set of American Idol, never meeting any of the contestants, I once asked my kids at that time, I think were 10 or 12, I asked the music coordinator, who was my only contact person in American Idol, asked if I could get some tickets for American Idol so I could go to the show with my kids to see the show. And they said, "Call Ticketmaster." Thank you. So that's how they treated us in American Idol.
Wow. Well, that's kind of cold.
Yeah.
It's like, can't even get one, a ticket.
After having worked there for years.
Yeah. Okay, so for the listeners out there, we're at Capitol Records right now.
Yes, we're at Capitol Studios in the Capitol Records Tower, and I like to go to some place away from home to work. I mean, in the beginning, I did work at home, but I quickly, once we had kids, I discovered it can be very distracting to work at home. When the kids come into the room or the wife notices that you're not that busy, "Hey, can you take out the trash?" And even though I was thinking about what I'm going to write next.
Yeah.
And it helped improve the family life as well, because separate family from work in a sense that when I come home, I'm really home and work is not lingering in the background, especially when the kids were younger. Even I spent less time at home, but the time I spend at home is really quality time. Or if I did work at home, it felt like I was always home, but I was never really home mentally.
Because your work was there.
Because the work was there.
Yeah. And you would probably be tempted to, like, after dinner, go
sneak
back into the studio because you had thought of something that you wanted to do and go touch up this or that.
Yeah.
But here, it seems like you come in here, you do your day's work, you go home at night, and you're done.
Exactly. And I get more done, more writing done, and I can be more focused. And then when I'm home, I'm really home. And I admit that when I have projects where the deadline is pressing, sometimes I do get home late. That happens too. I get home,
of course,
10, 11, but not all nights. So, and I have nights where I come home at 7 and cook dinner. So, and that's really nice then.
Yeah.
I come here like every day, 6 days a week, like a bank clerk. And even because I do strongly believe that composing is something like playing an instrument. It's like a muscle that you have to train every day. Something that you have to practice every day. And even if there are days where I don't have an assignment or where I'm done with the project and waiting for the next project to start, I come here to my writing room anyway. And then on those days where I'm idle, I'm writing something for myself. I write a concert piece or work on my symphony or do something. So that I write music no matter if I have a commission or a job. I write music every day.
That sounds like the way to do it.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of stories that I've heard, and this is just hearsay, but Stephen King, the famous writer,
yes,
I've heard that he gets up every day and writes.
Yeah.
Every day without failure. He always writes every day.
Yeah, I heard that about him too, yeah.
And I know another musician who's a songwriter, and he does the same thing. Every day he writes.
Yeah.
It's just part of his day. If he writes for an hour or he writes for 8 hours, he's always going to spend some time writing. So I think that's you're not alone. I think a lot of creative people do that. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
So this is a nice little room you have here. You got your keyboard, and I see on your monitor you got a bunch of notes there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you working on now?
I'm just in the middle of writing an arrangement for Celine Dion. Celine is doing a new album, and I was called to write one arrangement for it. It's
just one song?
Just one song, yeah. Because there are often records or albums where sometimes I'm called to write the whole album, and sometimes I'm just called to write one or two arrangements. In this case, just one. There are other arrangers working on other songs for this album. And this is a new song, which is refreshing because we're recording so much cover songs and songs from the Great American Songbook. But in this case, it's a new song by Carol Bayer Sager. And it's a really nice song.
Good.
Yeah.
It's nice when you like the song, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's really lovely. Yeah.
And are you working on anything else right now, too? Or is just this right now?
I'm also working on the new Michael Buble album with David Foster.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also working on about to work on a Michael Bolton project. Also a full album.
Great. Well, you're in demand.
Yeah.
I can't believe that you took the time to see me. That's great. And those are all huge stars. So from a guy from Germany comes over here and knows one person, I think you've done all right.
Well,
you've made it.
Yeah. Well,
you're working.
I am working.
And that's all any of us can ask for is to be working steady.
Absolutely.
And you're in demand. That's
I feel
great.
Blessed to be busy.
Would you do you have any recommendations for maybe young people who are in school and they're they want to do what you do? You have any suggestions for them?
Well, I'm getting asked very often, what's the best way into the business, and I guess I get asked, how did you get to the business? And and as I told earlier, my story, that's my story. But it's important to know that what works for one person doesn't work for the other. So every person has its own way into the business or how to break into the business.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing that I discovered applies to everybody is that the big break or some break into the business happens when preparation meets opportunity. So if you study hard and try to learn your skills, then you're prepared for whenever the opportunity comes, when you're given the opportunity to show what you can.
Because you're probably only going to get one shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, at least with that one person.
Yeah.
And if you blow that, then you got to find another opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Makes sense. But schools, I guess there's good music schools out there where people can learn to do arranging and composing and what you do.
But again, learning how to write music has a lot to do with listening to your inner ear. And there's things that can be taught in school, like the range of an instrument, a lot of theories, things. But to come up with a good melody, that's not something you can teach anyone.
Right. That's just creative.
That's just creative. And But again, you need the routine and you need the knowledge. To have the idea in your head doesn't make you a composer yet. You have to have the technique to put that down on paper or into computer or whatever you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe even having a musical vision is something you can learn, but you can only learn it by listening to music and paying attention and finding out what is it you like about that music and how did they do that. And that's when I said earlier, the best way to learn to write music is doing takedowns, doing transcriptions, because that's when you analyze it and get behind what's written.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that sounds like a really good, kind of like when I was a young musician, put on the record player and play along with other drummers, and you try to learn what they did.
Yeah,
and that teaches you a lot.
Yeah, and also what's very important is to have your music played once it's written, because you need that feedback from the musicians how it actually plays. If it plays well on the instrument, or if it's impossible to play, or if it's boring to play, or if it's not interesting to play. Because the music starts to breathe and live once it's being played by musicians. So I, as a composer, I write the music down, but it comes to life when being played by live musicians, when they perform it. And if you only write music and never have it being played by live musicians, then you don't find out if what you wrote actually works.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you write stuff here, do you use like samples and stuff of violins and all the orchestra music, and so you can hear it here, but it's being played by a computer and not by real musicians.
Exactly.
But you still can kind of get a pretty good idea of what it sounds like.
Exactly, but there's a difference. If the computer can play you back anything you put them into the computer. And there's a catch-22, or there's an upside and a downside to that technology, that with all this technology nowadays available, with sample sounds and sequencing and notation software, anybody can write music and can have it played back by computer. And it can be sometimes deceiving because it sounds great coming back from the computer, but it may not sound great if you pass out the music to musicians and have it played by live musicians. And I learned writing music with pencil on paper before computer technology was available to having played back. So I had to rely on musicians having it played back, and was a great learning experience for me. And even though with the technology available today, everyone wanting to learn music should put his music in front of live musicians and have it played, because you still need that learning experience. There are simple example for stuff that works on a computer, like if you write, let's say, a really soft instrument, alto flute, being accompanied in the background by trombones, you can make it work in the computer, but in a live situation it would never work because the trombones are way too loud, or they would bury the alto flute.
Yeah.
That's just like a simple example of something that works in a computer but in a live situation would never work.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you need the experience with live musicians.
Yeah.
And I work, just to maybe elaborate a little bit on the tools that I'm using. I started using computers early on for sequencing, but not for notation. I was one of the first guys in Hamburg that got an Atari computer in the mid-'80s to sequence little things, and I was using a software that back then was called Creator. Then they changed the name to Notator because they included notation software part of it. That company was called C-Lab. Then they switched the platform from Atari to Macintosh, and I switched with them the software. From Notator, they changed the name. They called it Logic, and the company was called Imagic. And then they later sold the company to Apple. The software was still called Logic. I would still, by all this time, I would still write arrangements by hand with pencil on paper. When a friend of mine made me aware that the software called Finale, which is a notation software that copyists use, is also a great tool for composers and arrangers. And I started using Finale because it, to me, feels like writing with pencil on paper, because you're not using it like a MIDI sequencer where you play in real time, play your music into a tape machine. You hit record.